Hello and welcome to the first episode of my 2023 Rugby World Cup preview series. We open the series by looking at the hosts and tournament favourites, the Les Bleus of France. Fabian Galthie may have steered France to the 1999 final, but a World Cup title still eludes this powerhouse. Can they finally bridge that gap on home soil, or will the pressure and lopsided draw knock them off their perch? Joining me to preview France's tournament are two esteemed rugby writers and debutants on the channel. Our first guest should be well known by listeners for his weekly top 14 column in the Irish Examiner, Mr. James Harrington. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. And joining him is the AFP's French rugby writer and proud Welshman, Illtud Dafydd. Welcome on board, Illtud.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
So before we start and get started on the French national team themselves, just start with your own excitement levels ahead of the World Cup. How are you feeling, and what's the vibe in the rugby community across France? So we'll go to you first, James.
The countdown clock's ticking really loud now for me. It's we've got France. Obviously, they've got 4 matches coming up in August. They're playing Scotland twice, Fiji, and Australia. And we'll know Galthier's final 33 by the time the Australia match kicks off. I'd expect. I mean, where I am I live in a small town in southwest France, miles away from any of the matches. Even here, the feeling is pretty palpable now that the excitement is really, really building. And I'd expect things are getting pretty feverish in the venue cities and where the squads are based.
Illtud, how are you feeling for are you nervous? Are you excited there?
Yeah, there's an element of excitement too. I live in Paris, and it's a massive international global city, so any sort of event that happens, it kind of finds it hard to find its place almost to a certain extent. But there's a nice sign outside the Saint-Lazare train station which has Paris Rugby World Cup 2023, and you see some advertising and sponsorships like in the supermarket, like Volvic Water's got a little Rugby World Cup badge on it. So there's some like pots of yogurt and fruit juice have got it on it as well. And I'm waiting to see Antoine Dupont's voice, because he's going to become the train announceman on all the trains in France over the summer and the build-up and during the tournament. So yeah, stuff is slowly building on a probably marketing wise and visual side, and then within the rugby community at like a ground level in the country, you do feel people really realize it, because that's kind of one of those topics of conversation that everyone's been talking about. Is, have you got tickets for any games? So have you got like a pack for the Wales games, or have you got a pack for the Saint-Denis Paris games, or you taking a weekend down in Marseille, whatever? So yeah, it's like, it's not everything that everyone's talking about, but within the rugby community, it is 90% of the conversation, really, which is nice, really, because French rugby's had a few problems in recent years and months, with the former president Bernard Laporte, vice president Sachin having problems, and also even Montpellier club president Maud Altrou with off-field issues as well. Mohamed Awas, the former France prop, as well, problems. So yeah, there's issues been going on during this World Cup, and now you feel like it's the home straight, and everyone is getting in the mood for it.
And it's good that excitement is building, because without being defeatist, we don't know what the story of rugby will be like in Australia in 4 years, or in America 4 years after that. And we won't talk about how Ireland would be way more excited if we had won the bid or anything like that. We won't get into that this evening, because we only have a certain amount of time. But that bid process was won by France back in 2017, so no time to cry over it anymore. And probably a move that doesn't get talked about enough is the fact that Fabian Galthie was brought in alongside the French squad, alongside Jacques Brunel back in 2019, and that was essentially a project 2023, if you will. And like, since then, he's won a Grand Slam. He's got an 80% win record in his tests. So I'll throw this one to you, Illtud. Like, with the benefit of hindsight, was bringing in Galthie a year early a genius future planning move? And do you think getting that extra year just in the system and in international rugby has helped him, as opposed to some of his peers, where there's been a lot of chopping and changing in international rugby?
It wouldn't be a genius move, but I think it's kind of an obvious move to bring him in as head coach after grandfather Brunel, who's nicknamed by some of the French press, and especially during that World Cup 2019 World Cup campaign, when Brunel didn't do much of the coaching, so they used a lot of his assistant coaches. And Galthie, despite being quite he seems quite like a statesman in certain senses, but he does do quite a bit of coaching. You know, he happily enough will give a word of advice either out on a training paddock or in the gym or during video sessions to players. And that's what he did when he came in under Brunel. He was able to see what everything was about. Beforehand, he was French rugby's main TV pundit for the French rugby game tests. So he followed them as close as you possibly could follow a team without being involved in them almost. And then, since then he's settled in greatly. He knows what he's doing. He's even planned ahead for after this World Cup, already put in place some of the assistant coaches that will come in with some like Laurent Labitte and Karim Ghazal heading to Stade Francais. So he plans ahead. He's not silly. He's also seen how other countries do things across the world. In his team announcements, he'd called his replacement bench the finishers, the finisseurs, something Eddie Jones had brought in when he was at England, and even I think before that, then with Japan. So, yeah, he's got aware of all of rugby on a global perspective, which can be a weakness of French rugby at occasions. So, yeah, like you said, it was a genius move by Bernard Laporte, who was a good friend of Galthie, and Galthie kind of has repaid Laporte quite a few times in mentioning him and during press conferences or post-match interviews, and saying, especially after, I think James might be able to correct me, but after the England, they hammered England at Twickenham in the Six Nations, he said that this victory is for Bernard Laporte while Bernard Laporte's legal processes were going on. So they were good friends off the field, and the fruits of that labour and that work that Galthie has been putting in for more than almost 4 years now has bore fruit over the past months, definitely.
And do you want to add anything there, James, before we move on?
Exactly right. The entire process of bringing Galthie on board was quite comically French at the time. I don't know if you remember, Midol first suggested it during the 2019 Six Nations that Galthie would join Brunel's staff in Japan, but Brunel himself, he was like, no, this isn't going to happen. No, absolutely not. And then 3 months later, and it was after the embarrassing loss at 44-8, was it, at Twickenham? Bernard Laporte publicly said that bringing Galthie on board might not be a bad idea after all. And then Brunel suddenly, rather pompously, said in an interview that he had decided to bring in S&C coach Thibaut Giraud and Fabian Galthie, and he said it in that order, and I think that was deliberate. And then pretty much in the next breath, he described Galthie as an assistant who would not have a leading role. French players aren't stupid at all. They know that Galthie, by this time, Galthie was already known to be the next France coach. They were out to impress him, not Brunel, who's a lame duck coach on a long written off tilt at Japan 2019. Then, of course, France pushed Wales all the way to the closing minutes in that quarter final in Japan with 14 players after Zedvahar Mahina was sent off for elbowing. And that was probably an overachievement given the state of France at the time. And you have to say a lot of that has to do with Galthie and a lot of working with what he had at the time, doing what he could with the tools at his disposal. I think it was Sean Edwards said in a later interview that he looked over at the French warming up before that match in Japan, and he was actually a bit nervous. He thought that France could turn them over. It nearly happened. It turned out it didn't, but it was close. So that early start helped, but what happened next was the key thing when Galthie actually got his hands on the job.
Yeah, he's done some work, and anyone who remembers France from 17, 18, 19, they were a shell of the team compared to what they are now, and like a lot of the talk, and probably rightly so, would be saying that it's the young players that brought this on, this extraordinary talent. Like I was doing some research for the pod, and like guys like Dupont, Entamac, Woki, Aldrich, Thomas Ramos, Challenge, Jalibert, Penno, like they're all within 3-4 years of age of each other. Like that's the spine of a team, all within a couple of years of age, and it's an incredible production line. We'll come back to you for this one, James, because like for those who may not be familiar, like is there a reason why so many high profile talents have come through, and not even just now, but since I made the notes, like they've won another World Cup final at under 20 level. it's, was it 3 in a row or 4 in a row across like a 6-year span? Like they've really gone to another level. But like, is there a reason for it that the people wouldn't be familiar?
Well, there's two things. There's a coherent age grade pathway that's been set. That was set up first by Didier Etier, who's now at Clermont, and Sebastien Piconnery, who's now at Pau. They set up a coherent age grade pathway for the young players coming through, and slowly over time that started to bear its fruit, as it started in 2018 and then 2019. Obviously 2020, 21, 22 were were hit by the COVID pandemic, but it's still the same thing. So there's that coherent age grade pathway which shows a route. It's literally a roadmap through the age grades. You start here, you end up at the France national team if you are good enough. As well as that, there's the GIF regulations. Now, these are perhaps slightly legally ropey, but they've yet to be challenged because everyone's pretty much on board with them. Basically, the current rules, and with allowances for newly promoted clubs, say that clubs in the top 14 and the Pro D2 can have a maximum of 13 non-GIF players on their books, and must average a minimum of 16 GIF players in their matchday squads. Now, a GIF player is someone who's come through the ranks of a French club in the age grade levels. So you start playing at 13. Jordan Joseph started playing rugby at 13 for Massey. In 2019, he'd done his 5 years in the age grade section to get through to be classed as a GIF by the age of, he was 19, 20 at the time. And there's a shorter period if you're in an academy. So it's 3 years in an academy, 5 years in a centre de formation, it's called. Interestingly, that meant that Delon Armitage and Stefan Armitage were GIF players because they spent 5 years playing rugby in Nice as teenagers. So they were GIF. This gives them a premium. It also meant that someone like Jérôme Théon, who's French born and bred, played international rugby for France, but came to the game late, wouldn't actually be classed as GIF, despite being French. The reasons for setting up in this really complicated and apparently strangely French way is to do with Europe, because they can't stop freedom of movement and stuff like that. So what this prompted clubs to do is to start to pay more attention to their academies. So they worked harder with Antoine Dupont, Romain Ntamack, Louis Carbonel, Leo Colli, Greg Aldrit, Pierre Bouguerie, and all the rest of them. And these players have come through the system, come through the age grade system that's run parallel to it, and are playing and were brought into their club squads and their senior squads earlier because they were doing better.
That's probably the most comprehensive summation of GIF rules and all that I've gotten so far, because I've just been, anytime anyone's asked me when I brought it up, I've just been kind of waffling on. But it's come to the fore. It's been successful, wouldn't you say? Like, they've, between the Under-20 World Cup, you look at, like, I think go on.
You can't argue with 320 championships in a row, admittedly over a 6-year period because of COVID. Increasingly, it's hard to argue with, what is it, since Galthie second, first, second in the Six Nations, charging up the world rugby rankings from 7th, I think it was in 2017 when they won the rights to host the World Cup, to 2nd now. Briefly, they were briefly world number 1 for, I think, for 1 whole week back in 2021. It's hard to argue with that. What is quite useful is the fact that they're still allowed a reasonable number of non-GIF players, so they can still bring in the big name stars who help bring people through the ranks, so that people like Sia Khaleesi can play for Racing, Eben Etzebeth can come into Toulon, Cheslin Colby can make a name for himself at Toulouse, Jack Goodhue can go to Cast, that sort of thing. So there's still sort of big star names coming on and coming into French rugby, and there's still a fair few of them, and it helps sides like Fiji, because there's a lot of Fijian and Pacific Island team players apply their club trade in France, earn their money in France. A lot of Georgians come to France and play their rugby. A few Spanish players are in the French system, and Portuguese players. So they're helping those players as well, while developing their own squad. Suddenly we've got a surfeit of too many players to play to keep for each position. We've got three international out halves, God knows how many international fly halves, a shed load of hookers and back rows. Slightly lacking in props, but I think they'll cope with that. And more centres and wingers than they can shake a stick at.
It's really been something by France. Like they have to be admired. But moving from the systematic makeup of the squad to more the names and the name profile, and like as you mentioned at the top of the show, like they're going to whittle down a 42-man squad down to 33 in time for the World Cup. And I suppose we'll just run through the squad between bolters and guys who may or may not make it, the guys who are nailed on, maybe injury concerns. And we'll start with yourself, Illtud. Do you want to take the kind of forwards and between guys to look out for, and also, you know, if there is any bolters or exciting prospects for this World Cup?
Yeah, the forwards, they seem to be, despite a lot of the French press's attempts to kind of build up some controversy, saying that Paul Villemze is not fit enough, or Emmanuel Mafou is definitely going to be picked for the World Cup despite being ineligible. It seems pretty settled, really. Someone like Cameron Wackie's been injured for a while, so he'll probably come back. He will definitely be involved in that 33, but then the decision then is if he comes in to the starting lineup or not. The one maybe interesting on the back row is Paul Boudinot, who has been a key part of the La Rochelle's two Champions Cup victories over Leinster in the past 12 months, and he may be someone who could oust Dylan Chetan from a spot in the 33-man squad. Chetan's been involved from pretty much the start of Galthie's tenure because of his ability in the lineup, but then Boudinot, playing at a better club with better players in much better form, deserves a chance and will probably get a few caps during the August series. So yeah, those amongst the forwards, but keep an eye out for, we're always pretty much, we all know who to look out for, don't we, within this French team. And I'm a big fan of Thibaut Flamand. I just like the way that he has adapted to playing for Toulouse, probably the biggest rugby club in France and one of the biggest sporting clubs in France as well, all the pressure that comes to it, and he's just like taking it like a duck to water, and then the step up to Test rugby, he hasn't looked out of place for a single second. Cameron Wackie, like I said earlier, I'm a big fan of him as well, especially in the line out and a bit of open play. And then Greg Alder, there's no better number 8 in the world, who won the European Player of the Year with the South African sides also involved. And yeah, those are the really players that stand out for me among the forwards, and James is the expert around the backs, I think.
I might just, sorry now, James, I'll jump in there just for 2 seconds, because 2 things. I have to defend Caelan Doris's honour as being, at least alongside Aldred, as one of the best 8s in the world. And secondly, a name that you left out but a lot of speculation about is Anthony Chalon. Could we expect to see him making a run for this squad, or is it just coming a bit too soon?
If he's fit, and he'll be there, I think, because the coaches like him, they picked him as the captain during the Australia COVID series in July 2021. He's handy in the open. He absolutely destroyed the All Blacks. He tackles everything. He's a good line option. And he probably will recover in time I think he might be in time just to play against the Wallabies on the 27th of August. and then we'll see from there. Really, they'll chuck him in the 33, I'm sure. But then if he gets game time during the World Cup, I don't know. But he's also the sort of player who, when you look at him, or when you meet him, when you speak to him in person, doesn't look like a real player. On the field, he's tall, definitely, but he's not built. He hasn't got massive shoulders. He hasn't got the biggest thighs, And then when you see him on the pitch compared to some other beasts, compared to Roman Taufinois, you would never say that they both play rugby. George is a tall guy. He's a tall guy, but he's not a big guy. He's got quite skinny upper body, but he's just got engine, and mentally he's just everywhere. He's like a dog. He's everywhere and everything. And then he's a very good addition to this French squad. And the fact that they picked him as captain during that Wallabies tour, and also the fact that I think he made his debut in 2017, maybe something like that. He's got experience both for Castres and now for another one who plays for Toulouse. So yeah, Jelonche will be in the 33, and then we'll see if they give him a run out to the World Cup as well.
And that's slightly scarier because he was. Am I right in saying it was the Ireland game he got injured in the Six Nations? And he was playing he definitely played that game. And he was playing very well before he got subbed off. But he was having a great year as well. He's someone to look out for. But we'll go through the backs, and I suppose for anyone at home, take a shot every time we mention Antoine Dupont in this podcast and for the rest of the World Cup, because he is the best rugby player in the world. But aside from Mr. Dupont, James, what should we look out for?
Again, more of the same, I think. I don't see too many big changes coming from the coaching staff. Galthie has long made a big song and dance about building for this World Cup. He's counted it down. He's basically timescaled his tenure in terms of matches rather in terms of days, weeks, months, or years. So it's we've played X matches, we've got X matches left, or Y matches left. Sorry. And what he's been seeking to build, his target always was an average of 50 caps per position. Now, COVID, availability, summer tours, and all the rest of it has put paid to his plans for that. So, but what he's been building is experience. So he's not going to suddenly necessarily throw in an entirely new backline or anything like that just because he can. So Dupont, yeah, he'll have Dupont behind him. Luku, possibly Kuyu or Saram. Entomac, because Entomac is Dupont's fly half. That's the way of it.
Quite the French press wanting Jalibert there sometimes as well, which is a bad this move. But Entomac, they're like brothers, aren't they, on the field?
They absolutely are. It's crazy to think that you'll just chuck Jalibert and it'll be the same. It won't be, because Dupont and Entomac are virtually one person, just with four legs, 4 arms, and 2 heads. Behind Antoine Hastoy is pushing for a place in the squad. It might happen, I don't know. Your wingers are pretty much sort of Villiers and Pinot wherever possible, with Dumortier and possibly I'd argue Gaetan. I think that of the 220s in the squad, the 220 guys, Emilien Gaetan and Louis Bielbiare, Gaetan is more likely to make the 23 because he can play centre and he can play on the wing. France have enough cover at fullback to make Bielbiare look almost a luxury. They've got Ramos, Jaminet, and so they're covered. They're covered in all the positions. What Galthie likes is an ability to move players around and players who can cover. So if he's got an injury issue at centre, he can bring in a winger who can play centre, or if he's got an injury on the wing, he can move a centre out to the wing and bring in another centre. So Fickou will be 12 or 13 or either wing because he can do it. Pinot can play, we know Pinot can play centre because that's where he started. Mofana can play either central position. Gaetan can play either central position or the wing. Mofana can also go out on the wing. So what he likes in these backs is an ability to play across positions that, I mean, you say you put back three together, you put the midfield together, and that's one thing. But he likes his centres to be able to play on the wing. He likes his fullbacks to be able to play on the wing. He likes his wingers to be able to play fullback. So if he can do all that, then he's happy. So he's got this sort of nebulous, amorphous back line that can do all the jobs. Dupont can play 10. So he's covered there. Ramos can play 10, so he's got 15. He's got 15 and 10 covered. Jalibert can play 15 and 10. Entomac can play 10 and 12. So that's what he's looking for. So I don't think we'll see too many changes. Possibly, as I say, Gaetan and or Bielbiari coming into the 33, but I'd be surprised if it was both of them.
Is there anyone then that would fall into the bracket that could miss out because of a lack of versatility then?
Arguably Gemini, in all honesty, because he is an out-and-out fullback, but his boot is worth its weight.
They said they found out that Gemini's boot is the longest kick. He's got the longest kick in Test rugby. Don't know how they can prove that, but that's what they say. And he's also left-footed. Left-footed, yeah, he's left-footed. I think so. So an open play that adds another option. And when he went on that Wallabies tour in 2021, he hadn't played a game of top 14 rugby.
No, he hadn't.
He was the top point scorer in Pro de Deux with a promoted Perpignan, but like a few seasons before that, he was playing the third, fourth tier. He'd given up on rugby after Toulon had released him after an injury. And then he was seen, well, this is the guy at 15. And then I thought, okay, sorted, he's going to be 15 for the World Cup. And then Ramos was bubbling away at Toulouse, playing 10, sometimes playing 15, playing all right. And then Jamine got injured, and then Ramos has stepped in, and his goal kicking is nigh on perfect. And also in open play, he offers something different. He's got a bit of Tom Castagnette about him. So like they've got options everywhere. And I think you're right there. Jamine might be an unlucky one there, and especially because he's out of form because he hasn't played much really, which is not his fault, but that's just also his decision to move to Toulouse from Perpignan, knowing that Ramos would be there, and also kind of the murmurs of Capozzo joining there as well. So it's not his fault definitely, but there's an element of maybe he should have chosen another club to go to where they needed a fullback. But aside from those into top 14 club politics, the strength and depth just within this squad is incredible. And then you look at some of the players who are started pre-season already, you're like, I forgot, how is he not in the top? How is he not in the French squad? So yeah, they've got depth across the backs.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot Brice Dulin as well. He was another pretty much specialist fullback. So one of those two is likely to miss out. But again, both of those two have their qualities that you think, well, you can't miss. Dulin is an incredible fullback, especially given that he's like 3'2" or however not tall he is.
He's a safe as houses choice. Like if Ramos can get criticized for one thing, it's that he might cross kick a ball across the face of his own goal or something on the 5 meter line. But like Dulin probably won't do that for you. Like I think Rog said it in his Examiner column or in the press before. He signed him because he liked that. He liked someone who was just steady and brings a lot in attack, and that's what Dulin does. And then like I suppose we can't talk about France and not talk about, the clubs doing so well at the moment. Plenty of listeners won't like me saying it, but La Rochelle have just won a second Heineken Cup final, beating Leinster. Toulouse are the kingpins, haven't won the top 14 again. And then this consistency that we haven't really associated for a few years before, say 2019 or 2018 in club rugby, has kicked on to the national team. As you said, James, second Grand Slam winners, second again in this cycle. And I'd throw this one to you, like this consistency as a whole, 80% of games won, even when they went down to Australia with their seconds and thirds and fourth choice players and did well down there. Like I suppose how do you even phrase it? Like, what, like, how was this consistency come, and how was Galtier got a squad that is so built in? Is it just that the depth is there, or is it systematic, or like where does it come from? Because it is unreal for France. Like,
It's almost as, it's not as clinical, but it's almost up there with how Leinster produce talent, really. But that's through a lot of very, very well-off people sending their boys to private schools in a certain kilometer radius. When in France, it's through the clubs, and clubs investing, and business people in the local area putting money into it. Toulouse are backed by Peugeot, Clermont are backed by Michelin tires, Stefan Say backed by Capricin juice drinks, but that's a different story. So, you know, like there's you need money whatever happens in professional sport, and you also see good people at the helm. So Didier Lacroix, the Toulouse club president, used to play for France, used to play for the club, and then went into business, then came back to the club as a president. So has finger in both pies of knowing how to run a business, and also knows what it takes for a rugby club to be successful. But it goes back to what James earlier was saying about how Didier Ratière and the work he did when he was national technical director at the French Federation, where he moved, instead of having one squad of players always training at the French centre in Marcoussis, which is French rugby's kind of headquarters in the south of Paris, not too far from the Orly airport. Instead of having just one there, they've got plenty dotted across France. So instead of having your best players coming up from Perpignan or going across from Bordeaux, or some of them coming down from Normandy, even down to Paris for a few weeks and then dispersing again, taking them away from the local clubs to a certain extent, taking them away from where they've grown up. Then what they do is let them stay in, they call them pôles, which is like a hubs, really. And Antoine Dupont, Anthony Gélange, Pierre Bougaille, Gregory Aldrit, and I'm sure plenty of other players have come through that system, where they were based in a pôle in Auch, which is the town where Anthony Gélange and Antoine Dupont went to high school. And that's kind of bear its fruit. And yeah, they've got quality across the board. And also there's a lot of talk of these, without talking technically, a lot of these players have been brought up seeing rugby as a profession now, where maybe French rugby was slow to switch on to that, to realize actually this is a serious stuff. Yeah, we can have fun, we can maybe smoke a cigarette after the game, whatever, have a few beers, but these guys are far more switched on to it, where they're like, actually, this is a proper job. They grew up seeing a general Romain Tamac and Mathieu Jalibert grew up in the generation of watching Johnny Wilkinson, so he's the ultimate profession as a fly half if you're looking to become a fly half. And I've realized, well, actually, we can be like what classic French fly halves have been like in the past, or we can be like what the best are, which sadly for a lot of Welsh people was Johnny Wilkinson at one time. So I think a lot of these players are mature, they've got old heads on very young shoulders, and they're showing us what to do, and the quality is across the board. And yeah, French rugby, be it at a local level in the 6th tier or with the World Cup on the horizon, is blossoming.
I think you may have nailed it there with the old head on young shoulders, because you look at the age group of that French squad, like at least 2/3 of the squad are under maybe 27 or 28. You could get another World Cup out of them. Like that's what we're talking about here. This, like, obviously they haven't done anything yet. They have won a Grand Slam. They haven't been in a World Cup conversation yet, not for another month at least, or 2 months at least. But like, we could be talking about a very, very good French side who pushes for 2 World Cups. Like we don't know.
Because their point of maturity, only someone like Gal Ficou and Romain Tafiano probably won't be at the next World Cup. Ficou might stretch out when he's 33, Romain Tafiano and Winnie Antonio won't be there because they're the wrong side of 30. But the rest, they'll be there at 2027 in Australia. And they'll have had a World Cup under the belt already. They'll have had an extra 4 years of very good club rugby and some very good test rugby also. So yeah, we can all say that France are favourites now, but if they're favourites for this, what are they going to be in 2027? But
what's particularly scary about that is that these guys like Dupont, Bentamac, Ramos, Gélange, all these guys who are that age now, who are able to do another World Cup, have Marco Gazzotti, Oscar Giroud, Baptiste Jeannot, Gaëtan Biel Biarré, Hugo Reos, all coming directly underneath them. Jordan Joseph has rediscovered his love of rugby down in Pau, and he's going back to Racing this summer after 2 years out on loan. If Stuart Lancaster and all those guys can get the best out of Jordan Joseph, there's suddenly the issue of who's behind Greg Aldridge isn't a problem anymore, because there's Jordan Joseph and Marco Gazzotti coming through as the eights to follow him. And the difference these days is not the talent in the squad. France has always boasted ridiculous talent. It really has. Go back. There's always been a talent. There's always been talented players. They've all been good. The difference is in how they're coached at all levels, but noticeably for Galthie, for the senior squad, it's what Galthie's done. A lot was made at the time about his decision to ditch a lot of the old French guard. I pointed out that there are only two players in his first squad who'd actually hit 30. But the thing is, it wasn't a top of the head sky blue decision made out of nowhere. The France 2 TV channel at the time showed clips of interviews that Galthie and Raphael Ibanez had with players, and he'd laid out his plans, his ethos, his demands, and basically said to them, "This is what we're going to do. Can you do it?" And there's a painful clip in which Wenceslas Loris basically says, "No, I don't think I can. I don't think I can make this commitment to this very difficult step up in intensity." And he's not been selected since. He's fit retiring. He's on a World Cup Joker contract until November the 18th at Racing, and then he'll retire. But basically, Galthie asked his players if they basically to keep up, playing it in 4-4 time, watch him for the changes and try and keep up. That's what they were doing. And he also, with his coaches, it sounds really trite. He has this phrase, train to train, in which all the coaches go off, they work with academy players, with young players, with the France under-20s. And what they're doing with those guys before they even get to the senior squad is they're honing their training plans, so that when Dupont and the rest of them walk through the door at Marcoussis or wherever, there's no time wasted explaining something that doesn't need explaining, no time wasted going everything is absolutely ready. So it's walk through the door and you are training.
The best example is Sean Edwards, where his French is restricted because of just that some people find it difficult to learn foreign languages, and I think he is happily readily admit that, but his French is good. I've watched him during these full training sessions where they're called high intensity. He uses 3 words. 3 words in French, and that's all it takes to get the world's best defense. Because the atmosphere that's built within the coaching staff is that, okay, we can go and coach the under-20s, help them out, or go and coach academies, or even coach 6th, 7th tier club rugby teams. Because when you keep fresh in your mind of how to be a better coach, be that with an under-8s team or Antoine Dupont, you're always aware. And also with testing, what can happen sometimes with some coaches possibly is that because you've got big breaks between your November test window and the Six Nations, you're not coaching on the paddock. You're looking at video, you're keeping an eye on the players, you're planning ahead for the next camp, but you're not on the pitch looking at players, realizing on a sports level, also as a human level, as a personal level, what that individual needs. Do they need an arm around the shoulder, or you can spot when a player's maybe flagging a bit so you can give them time off, or like they're given to Paul Villemze this week, they said, actually, we know that he's got a dodgy hamstring, so we should let him do what he needs to do in the gym and do a bit of rugby, but he does need to do the full intensity session. So they've so switched on. And Galthie, I'm a big fan of him. Maybe some people might see him quite cold. He's a very difficult character when he was a club coach, but something's clicked, and he's just probably one of the best French best coaches French rugby has had, and probably is right now is probably with Andy alongside Newfound one of the best coaches in the world.
I'm just getting more and more scared. So thankfully, the next question brings us all back down to earth, and it is this draw, this lopsided draw that everyone, well, as we said beforehand, everyone this side of the world, everyone this side of Europe has been talking about anyway. And like as things currently stand, when we record, France are second in the world, New Zealand are third, and they're both in the same pool. Ireland are first, South Africa are fourth, and they're in the other pool, and they're destined to face off those 4 teams in the quarterfinals. And we'll come to you first, Illtud. Like we'll talk about Pool A in a minute, the France's pool, but the actual draw and the structure and it's been criticized a lot. But what's your overriding thoughts on it, or do you think it's just much ado about nothing from fans?
I used to agree with the criticisms of the draw, and I was there when it was made, and it felt weird because it did feel quite early for the World Cup. It was made in France's old stock exchange, which is like literally across the road from the office. So it was nice, nice to go in there for a nice little short commute from where I work. So that was quite handy. But no, and it did feel a bit like a lot of pomp for something that was happening in 3 years' time. Is this really what's happening? But now I've realised, you know what? Like it's a bit of a cliche, but to be the best, you have to beat the best. And France, to win this World Cup, they were good. They were okay. They were drawn against New Zealand, yes, but they probably would have had to beat Ireland or South Africa anyway to win the World Cup. So be that in the quarters, or be that in the semis, or be that in the final, it's still like you still have to win the game. And obviously, maybe people are hoping to have would have hoped to have a France-Ireland final. Maybe, okay, fantastic. You can hope for as much as you want, but that's not the reality of it. Maybe the final will be France against whoever else, or Ireland against whoever else, or New Zealand against whoever else. And a lot of the time, finals are letdowns anyway, so don't worry about that. So I kind of agree with this thing, and it's something that the Galthie said, that they've used the November tests last time around, where they were like building up. They felt that it was like Australia was the quarters, South Africa was the semis, and Japan was the final. And that's how they built it. So they kind of replicated that already. So it's part of Test rugby. It's part of the World Cup, where to win the World Cup, you have to win 3 knockout stages, plus at least, well, you have to really put your game going, sadly, because of the way how Test rugby is lopsided and has been for 30, 40, since it started, really, that you have to step up for 2 pool games and 3 knockout games, and you will then you can have a shout to win the World Cup. And that's just how it is. And maybe some people in Ireland aren't too happy with it because they feel whatever. Some South Africans aren't happy with it because they could in theory face New Zealand in the quarters, when they probably hope to meet them in the final. I don't know, but no, I think I agree that it's a much to do about nothing, and it'll be a good World Cup what happens, and it makes it easier for Wales to reach the final as well. So can't complain.
I should throw in there just that a stat was given to me before, that any team who has beaten Ireland or New Zealand in a quarterfinal or semi-final has lost the next game. So in case you get too far ahead, I'm not saying you are, but just in case anyone gets too far ahead, that records are meant to be broken, but the record still holds in place at the moment. We've seen it in 2019, and I suppose, James, would you go along with this? Is it just the Irish fans complaining, as every Welsh fan has said for the last 20 years, or is it, or do you think there is genuine cause for concern?
Honestly, it is what it is. When I checked back actually a bit earlier today, and when the draw was made in December 2020, when Illtud went over to the whole stock exchange there, South Africa were the number 1 team in the world. England were second, New Zealand were third, France were fourth, Ireland were fifth. Today, Ireland are first, France are second, New Zealand are third, South Africa are fourth, Scotland are fifth, England are sixth, Argentina are seventh, and Australia are eighth. There's no huge difference there. The top 4 is 3 of the top 4 3 years ago, 3 of the top 4 today. The top 8 hasn't changed. So you're going to see differences. In December 2020, South Africa had a 4.5 point advantage over England in the rankings. I mean, that's massive. That's All Blacks in their pomp. That's effectively saying South Africa in December 2020 were unbeatable. Today, world number one ranked side Ireland are 1.3, somewhere around there, points ahead of France, and France in second could very well drop to third by the end of the Rugby Championship. There's the big difference. The big difference right now, the difference between then and now, is that the gap between nations has closed. The difference between first and eighth in December 2020 today has dropped from nearly 14 points to under 12. So what we're saying is sides are getting better. It's getting harder to win. That's what we, as people who claim to love the game of rugby, we should all want that. We want victories that genuinely mean something. We want wins that are powerful. So what if two of France, New Zealand, Ireland, or South Africa don't make the semis? Frankly, honestly, if you want a World Cup to be so predictable that you can work out who the semi-finalists are going to be before kickoff, frankly, I pity the lack of romance in your soul, to be honest. it's pointless. We are where we are. The draw has been made. I think one of the top four will win. I'd like it to be France, but one of the top four will win it, and they've got to do it the hard way, and that will make it so much sweeter.
It certainly will be the hard way, that's for sure. And like, if we're being real, France have one big pool game on opening night, which it couldn't have been said in 07 because we actually thought Ireland were decent going into the World Cup in 07. That went pear-shaped. But opening night game against New Zealand, after that, it feels like, okay, just get minutes into lads, make sure no one gets injured. You know, like France, when they played Italy in the Six Nations, even the last 2 years, they never really got out of second gear, and they still bet them. And I'll come to yourself first, James. Like, aside from the old nemesis of New Zealand, like, is this just a favourable pool with a favourable schedule? We know that the home side gets a say on their schedule to some degree, even if wink, wink, nudge, nudge, it doesn't happen, but it does. Or is there an uneasy sense about that kind of opening game?
It's what that opening game means, and it's what happens in Ireland and South Africa's pool that really matters to France, I think. France will go out to win it. They absolutely will. They will want to go unbeaten as far as possible. That's no great surprise. You can only play and you can beat the team in front of you. There's nothing they can do about what happens in the other pool on their side of the draw. But what happens in the other pool on their side of the draw really matters, because I think the most important thing is to get South Africa out of the way as early as possible. Which means that if France finish top of their pool, South Africa have to finish second, which means Ireland have to beat them. South Africa have this habit; they get forged in a tournament, and they get harder and stronger and tougher, and by the end of it, if they get to the final, they've got it to all intents and purposes. So you need to get to them early. So the earliest France can get to South Africa is the quarterfinals. That's what they need. If they get South Africa in the quarterfinals, then it's likely they'll meet Ireland in the final, and they'll be happy with that. They'll be happy with that, I think, than meeting Ireland in the quarterfinals, beating Ireland and going on to meet South Africa. Notwithstanding the fact that whichever side beats Ireland in the quarters loses the next match.
Yeah, aside from that, Illtud, would you share the same sentiment as James? Is it, get New Zealand out of the way, beat them, hope Ireland beats South Africa? And you mentioned actually South Africa's run of games, James. Ireland have a week off after the South Africa game, which could be a benefit to them in the long run. But come back to yourself, Illtud, do you think it's get past New Zealand, win that, and then that's fine. Just stay fit and be humming from there.
There's a big part of it where you speak to a lot of people involved, like a lot of my friends who play rugby, whatever, and they say the most French thing ever would be to lose to New Zealand on opening night, but then to win the World Cup.
Yeah, very much.
Just because it would just be like, there's been so much build up to September the 8th. Like when they played them in November 2021, it was like, wow, this is the appetizer. They even bought the World Cup trophy out in a Louis Vuitton suitcase with Jerome Kino, and like it was like, wow, this is like, if there's ever going to be like an amuse-bouche for a World Cup opening game, this is it. And then if they lose it, it'll be a bit of a damp squib. But then if they win the World Cup afterwards, no one gives a damn. So yeah, it's part of it. Like you said, South Africa, they might be, I wouldn't say scared of South Africa, but beating South Africa in November was a big step for them. It was a big step for France because it was the first time I follow France since 2019 Six Nations. I didn't go to the World Cup, but I followed them really since then. Every home game, almost, barring paternal leave, been up to Makusi, etc. And that was the first time that any of the players had started mentioning the World Cup publicly. Privately, I'm sure behind closed doors with their friends and family, they spoke about it because you would have to plan not to probably get married or not to have kids at this time of the year. But publicly, they were kept quite quiet, reserved, and humble about it. But then after that stuff game, Thomas Ramos said, yeah, World Cup's on our mind. Gregory Aldrich said, yeah, the World Cup's on our mind. Which a year out from the World Cup, obviously, is the case. But to say that publicly, that was a turning point. To do it in Marseille for the 6,000 people, where they'll go back in September to play Namibia. They felt like southeast of France definitely got behind them big time. In that Marseille ground, the Velodrome, which is a massive stadium in French football, definitely. And it could potentially become a massive stadium in French rugby as well now. You do feel like the players know what's coming. They just, the All Blacks are looming, but South Africa are also looming. Ireland, it's a funny little tit for tat battle they've got with Ireland going on in the press and also on the field, especially at the Leinster, La Rochelle, Toulouse narrative, Munster to it as well. So yeah, it's all quite funny and it's all great and it's plenty to talk about, plenty to write about. And then yeah, September it can't come quick enough.
It's funny you mentioned Marseille there because it's only just coming to me now. Do you think they may have missed a trick by the fact that France won't be there for a quarterfinal? Because in 2007 it was they won the group, they were in Stade de France, and if they came second in the group, they were in Cardiff. I think that was a poor mistake. But do you think they could have possibly gone to Marseille, or did it have to be Stade de France really?
That Cardiff Wales deal was some rugby national body politics that nobody has really know what actually happened. Sadly, it would be great to see what that be transparent to how that ended up like that. But what's in the past remains in the past, I guess. Have they missed the trick? I don't know. The Stade de France is where they have played. It is their home. Yeah, which is quite cool about French rugby because they can afford to move the games around the country. They played Japan in Toulouse. They played South Africa down in Marseille and the Six Nations next year because Olympics. They'll move that around as well. But no, the Stade de France is the home and it's where the players are used to, and they've got a decent record there as well. And yeah, it's the biggest stadium as well. So the World Cup will obviously like that, and World Rugby needs full stadiums to exist. Otherwise, it goes bankrupt. So that's how it is.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I probably just have a slight bias to it because I think it's an unbelievable stadium, and I watched that South Africa game thinking, "Jesus, it's going to be class for the World Cup," and it will. But
Yeah.
it won't be the same without France there. But it's still a great stadium, and that doesn't really change too much. And I suppose we've covered now stadium politics. Ireland has come up a few times. Everything bar Dupont, essentially. But we'll get on to your predictions now, lads. I know you kind of half touched on it, but are France going to do it? Are they going to lift the Webb Ellis Cup for the first time, or is it going to go elsewhere? I'll come to you first, Illtud. Our first prediction of this preview series. So could really nail your colours to the mast here.
I think if France don't win it, I think it could be one of France as a country's biggest sporting disappointments, because of the build-up it's been, because of how successful the team has been over the past 4 years. It's on home soil. All the politics has gone on off the field. So yeah, France, when in work people ask me who I think the favourites are, I think France are joint favourites with Ireland. I think Ireland's past in World Cup. Ireland's record in past World Cups, everyone knows about the quarterfinal curse, however you want to say it. It all depends on how Johnny Sexton goes. I think there's nothing original how important it is to the Ireland setup. Yeah, I'd like to see France win it just because it would be great, because you always want, for a World Cup to be successful, you want the host to go as far as possible, because everything comes with it. TV rights, sponsorship, money behind bars, shirt sales, etc., etc. And also, when you're in that country, it's cool when the World Cup's loved by everyone. If the hosts get knocked out in the quarters, but the semis and finals get a bit flat, really. I think it was similar sort of in Japan. It was a massive, massive, massive thing about Japanese rugby. They did superbly in the pool stages, and losing to South Africa was a bit of a, okay. It's kind of dropped the intensity to an extent. So I'm not going to say France is going to win it. I'm going to say one of France or Ireland are going to win it.
Okay, very, very fence-sitting answer, but to me, it's the safe bet. Like, let's be real. They've thrown up two of the best games of rugby of the last 4 years in their last two matchups, and it's, personally, I do think France will win it. That's me saying as a rugby viewer, not like taking the Irish hat off. But James, do you think France will go all the way, or do you think it's for someone else?
I genuinely hope they do. I genuinely hope they go there and win it. It would be just reward for the turnaround that we've seen under Galthie. We've discussed the things around it, we've explained, and the systems around it. We've tried to talk about how it's not all him, but there is a lot of him there. And there's also a lot of Rafa Ibanez as well, and Sean Edwards and Lauren Levitt and Corinne Gazelle, and the senior Jerome Garces, who's worked so hard on their discipline. It will be just France have put a lot of financial, political, rugby capital into this, and it kind of needs to work. I don't necessarily think if they didn't win, it would be all that bad, because we've seen this turnaround. We had from 2000, after the World Cup final in 2011 until the start of the Six Nations in 2020 was just a dreadful period, and then from the start of the Six Nations, we've seen how things have changed, how a coherent and sensible and organised coaching structure can turn good players and hugely talented players into actually a hugely talented team. And it's important. And as I say, whether if they don't win it, it won't be the worst thing for them, but it would be much better if they did and went to Australia as champions rather than as the side that nearly got there. They've got to 3 finals. They need to make it 4 and actually win one.
I think the big thing as well, I think if anyone hasn't read Unholy Union by Michael Aylwin, read it. It's probably the best book of rugby you'll ever put your eyes on. And he's got a quote saying that if you draw a line between Bordeaux and Lyon down, there's 27 million rugby fans. That's more than any other country that really has rugby apart from Japan in it, really. Really interesting. England has a population, but the heartlands of economically rugby is the south of France. And I think we can keep going, and rugby is in a very difficult place at the moment, financially, morally, health-wise. It's complicated. But what rugby needs is money globally. It needs investment from people. And when you have a population pool, a decent population pool as France is, yeah, well, you can dream about getting China involved or the US involved or India involved, but that will take decades. Maybe not the US, but China and India. What France already has is a population pool of mad rugby fans who absolutely love rugby and understand 15-a-side rugby as it is. And if France win the World Cup, that pool of population who love rugby will increase in quality and quantity. And I think rugby globally would be better for it. But then at the same time, if you're Irish, if you're South African or Kiwi, then you would disagree, wouldn't you? But no, that's just me seeing quite globally, working for a global news agency, seeing things a bit stepping back. And yes, James and I both live in France. We cover the Pro de Deux, top 14. We love it for the good and the bad sides of it, but it would be a nice fairy tale ending as well. So.
And that's an important note to end on, because maybe there's a bit of an Irish obsession with France and, you know, the old French rugby and the French style that used to beat us in the 90s and the 2000s in particular. But there would be a very good romantic element if France did win. Like if England won in 2015, I don't think people would have celebrated. I don't think too many people celebrated New Zealand in 2011. But
if England win anyway, if England win any time, no one celebrates part of English Day. So
if England or Wales win this World Cup, everyone's going to say it's going to have an asterisk. So like, you know, but they would be that romantic level if France do on home soil. Like they've got the best player in world rugby, the most marketable player in world rugby as their captain. He's about to go to the Olympics. Like even if he doesn't make a great sevens player, and there's no hope in hell that he won't make a great sevens player, he's going to the Olympics because he is Antoine Dupont. And like, I know World Cups, you could argue that bar maybe, you know, England 03, New Zealand 2015, it's not always the outright favourite who goes on to win. But if France do it, I think it mightn't be great for the provinces. It mightn't be great for Irish rugby because typically we have a hangover season on World Cup years. But it would be something remarkable, wouldn't it? And I wouldn't begrudge them. As long as it's not an Ireland-France final, I wouldn't begrudge France, to be honest. Do you know? But
do you know, I wouldn't mind an Ireland-France final.
It would be spectacular, to be fair. It really would. And like, that's not just me being Irish, but like, you know, England 2015, they needed Ireland to go far because that's where all the money was and that's where who had bought all the tickets. And even if Ireland France go, like, it was often said about Munster fans back in the day that even if there was no tickets to get in, you'd find someone in there. Like they got down to Cape Town, for instance, and it would make for a cracking final. And if it does happen, the first game of the Six Nations the following year is Ireland against France in Marseille. So write your stories now, I suppose.
There wouldn't be a hangover after that for that one, I don't know.
There would be one hell of a hangover. But we'll leave it at that, lads, because I've kept you more than long enough, and thank you very, very much for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow with the second preview pod, and we continue with Pool A, and I caught up with New Zealand journalist Jamie Wall to hear his thoughts on the All Blacks, who would seek to avenge the ghosts of 2007. And that will be followed with a preview of Italy on Thursday, with a recap of Ireland's warm-up clash with the Azzurri rounding out the week. So thanks at home to everyone for listening. If you do like what you see or hear, please do subscribe. And you can find all the links from my channels below, as well as links to my guests, James and Illtud's Twitter pages, which I highly recommend for news this autumn. And keep an eye out, of course, for James's top 14 column in the Irish Examiner. But for now, and until tomorrow, take it easy.